Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today, Saul wants to talk about space opera. Not just any space opera, but space opera, the role-playing game.
Right. I know I mentioned it quite a few times about space opera, and some of you may be wondering, what is this old archaic thing that Saul keeps bringing up?
Or
But
you may not.
or you may not, so I decided to give a whole episode devoted to space opera. And space opera to me is probably one of my favorite games of all time, at least in the top three. So it is a game that I've played for a long time. I ran for a long time. Mostly ran. I've only played a few times. So from about 1981 to about 2001, I ran a couple campaigns with different groups, and I ran quite a bit of games at local cons here in Northern California.
That was after 2001, wasn't it?
I might have been. I think. Yeah. I don't remember. I think one of them, our friends had gone. This was interesting. He had gone through DDC. What is it? The DDC
Shuffler?
program, and they have them online. You can look at them all the way back to like Dungeon Cron, Dungeon Cron,
DungerCon.
DungeonCon, like 5 or 6, which is way early, right? But I didn't go to DungeonCon back then. I started going to DungeonCon 1991, and I probably didn't start running games until about at least 95, 96. So for about 10 years, I ran games at
Space opera.
Space Opera at local cons. From I don't think I ran. I think I ran it at Strategicon, or not Strategicon, but something like that. But it's now defunct. Pacificon and DungeonCon mainly. So I ran it for quite a few years. I even ran it at a con. I've mentioned that before, and I just wanted to give a little review of what space opera is. And
Is it even published anymore?
well, that's the funny thing, is that it is in fact published. A lot of people. I'm on several groups on Facebook, and one of the groups is Dead Games, called Society of Dead Games or something like that. When people post a picture of a game in there to talk about, oh, what about this game? Does anybody remember this game? Did everybody play this game? Is usually the 2 or 3 questions that always pop up. And every once in a while, space opera gets put up there, and sooner or later somebody goes, well, actually, that game is still being published. And from what I remember, is the publisher owner, the publishing company of Fantasy Games Unlimited, Scott Bazaar. I forget, he has a middle name, but I don't know what it is. Scott Bazaar has always maintained the licenses of the properties that he has owned. He got into a bit of a hassle with one of them, but for the most part, he would, I forget what the rules are, but if you publish it, and then you don't lose the copyright. So even though Space Opera was made in 1980, published 1980, he would periodically publish it in a traditional way and put books out. Well, with the advent of PDFs and stuff, he remade his company, sort of. I don't know if I guess he kept a hold of it, but he started a website, and it's Fantasy Games Unlimited, and he offers a lot of Fantasy Games Unlimited games. A lot of them, like there's old Gangster, there's all space opera, a lot of games that I never saw, but only saw in advertisement of what other games that they would sell. FGU published quite a few games. I forget how many. I was looking at their catalog not too long ago. They have what I would consider quite a bit of different games. There was a Wild West game that I never saw. Other games are Bushido, Swordbear, Year of the Phoenix, Daredevils. Aftermath was a big one. That's a post-apocalyptic game. But for me, it was Space Opera is the one that I really latched onto. I don't think I ever picked up another FGU game. I don't think till much later. What I found is that there was quite a few typos in the game. That's a big complaint about the game. There's a lot of typos. It's constructed kind of in an old war game style, because
Well, it was based off of a Mark Ratner's Space Marines, which was published in 1979, or that was the theory.
No, no, it's true because if you look at Space Marines, it's a miniature game. It has all the same races and the background is very similar to space opera. So space opera is literally based on the world that Mark Ratner kind of made in Space Marines.
Well, also, if you think about it, it was published in 1980. So
Right.
you have to go back in your way back time machine there and realize that that's
Publisher was a little
probably
different.
not only that, but according to what I read,
Yes.
they it was Scott Bazar hired Ed Simbalist and Phil McGregor and Mark Ratner,
Yeah.
and they all lived in different places.
Yes.
The Canadian West, Australia, and in the east of the U.S., which it doesn't say where, but
Well, I think Simbalist was in Canada and Ratner is in Australia, and that would leave that Phil McGregor
so it was
was
all
in.
done by correspondence. It wasn't like today where you can get on a Zoom call and
No,
talk
not
to
at all.
people all around the world.
I can't even imagine trying to make a game with correspondence, talking, or I don't even think they could have emailed each other back then. So they had to literally write each other letters
Yes.
and
And it
mail
says it
them.
was all done through correspondence.
Oh man! So obviously there's going to be some problems. I heard also Mark Ratner kind of stepped off away from the whole deal. He had a lot of what is it
It
called?
says Mark had little input into space opera itself.
Yes, right. And I think he said in an interview a long time ago that it was evolving more than he wanted to evolve it. And he goes, "Yeah, go ahead, just use the background." And then he stepped back. It was mainly Phil McGregor and mainly Simbalist, right, who came up with a lot of the background and stuff. Uh, Unfortunately, I think Simbalist passed away around 2007, and Phil McGregor's still around. He is now in Australia, I believe, and is he's doing Kickstarters. He's still creating games. He was I think he was a history professor for to pay the bills, and now
That could be right or wrong. Going Saul's memory is not always the best on things like that.
so Space Opera for me was my favorite game. I think I have a weird hole in my memory and in my RPG shelves for a while that West End Games Star Wars had come out, and I never owned it, and I don't think I ever played it, which was kind of weird because I loved Star Wars. But I had already bought Space Opera. I had bought almost all in on Space Opera, and here I am talking about Space Opera. I bought it in like 1981. That's good 40 years later. Talking about Space Opera still. So a lot of people think that it's a dead game. It's not. Scott Bazar still publishes it. From what I read and from what I hear, he basically is selling the stuff that he still has on in stock, and the idea of making second edition. Now, this is only one edition of Space Opera, so there was never the fix edition, which is usually the second edition where they fix all kinds of things wrong, clean up the rules a little bit. There's never been another edition. I don't think there ever will be since Simbalist has passed away and Ratner is totally got away from doing anything with role playing games. And Phil McGregor, I don't know. I don't think he's very happy with the way things turned out. There's all kinds of complications with Scott Bazar and his publishing company, but he still sells the stock that he has on hand. He now is selling PDFs. So I'm not sure if you can hold on to a copyright by selling PDFs, but maybe you can. I have no idea. And so he still owns the rights of a lot of these old games that a lot of people played back in the 80s. And I was really surprised to see a website pop up. I'm not sure when this website came up. I remember years ago, this is probably right around 2000, he didn't have a website. He wasn't selling, at least traditionally, through any sort of store. I think you could write to him at the time and get a catalog and then send him a check. I mean, this is old style. Send him a check, and he would send you the book that he had in stock. But for the most part, I have almost every space opera book. Jolene just informed me that there's three more I have to get.
I did not inform him he had to get him. I told him what they were.
Oh yes. So obviously, space opera he got somebody to write they call them star atlases, and those for me they were very valuable. They gave you they were a star atlas of a whole sector in space opera, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So obviously it's still in print. Obviously it's still around. It's not officially dead.
What he's saying is he wants you to go out and find it and buy it
No,
and
no,
play it.
no. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying I've mentioned it quite a bit on our podcast on different topics, and I just decided to do a review of the game and talk about how there's a lot of misconceptions about it. Right? People say, even just the other day, I was listening to Happy Jack's podcast, and they were talking about I forget what they were talking about, but one of the host goes, "Oh man, space opera," and he goes, "That's ridiculous, crunchy game." They were talking about crunchy games, I guess, and he goes, "We made all we did in that game was make a character. After 3 hours, we had a character made, but I've never played it." So that's a he might have been a little bit exaggerating, but I think the first time you look at rules of any game, especially anything a little bit more complicated, a role playing game, it's going to take you a while to make a character.
Well, and it says that character creation is a long process in space opera.
Right.
It takes about an hour if you're
Yeah,
experienced
it's
to
about
make
right.
your character.
I would take me about an hour to make a character when I got good. And
But it has a lot to do with, I mean, there's some random rolls, but then you have to choose a bunch of stuff.
right. So this is what Scott Bazar had to say about space opera. Let me see. He says that in the introduction, he says space opera is not an easy game. To which I say he is totally correct. It was made in the 1980s. It's based on kind of a miniature setup. A lot of these, I'm guessing, I don't know, but Simlis was into miniature games or war games in the past because it has that traditional war game
Feel?
feel, and when you in the rules, instead of like let's say the table of contents referring to page numbers, it refers to section 10.01, 10.02, and that's a total war game way of it also tells you the page number, but it also tells you the point system. And I always thought it was weird because I didn't play war games, but I just kind of just okay, fine, whatever. I wrote quite a few notes about space opera, but I'll try to be brief in this half hour.
He'll try. He usually isn't.
So space opera came in a box set. It had 2 volumes, the booklets, volume 1 and volume 2. They were not named. They came with these like a little bit cardboard sheets, handouts that gave you. They were blue for some reason, mine. And anyway, they copied what fine back in the old days, and they probably still do, except for now maybe they copy. Anyway, they had some pretty cool sheets. Obviously, a character sheet. They had a planet sheet that had like a globe made flat, so it kind of had that triangle shape to the planet. I don't know. People who make
I don't know. You made my eyes glaze over.
there's a planet like the what is it the social and economical elements of the planet on a sheet. It had other stuff. There was all kinds of. There was like 3 cardboard sheets that were double sided, and they each had like a blank character sheet, planet sheets, and a geographical which
Geographical.
geographical information of the planet, and so on. I think it had the box set also had a little thing about advertisements for other games, and that was it. I don't. It didn't come with dice. It was it's used yeah. It didn't come with dice. So it's a percentile system. It's very simple. You have a number that you have to roll under to hit, and the number is really easy. I think if you're standing or erect, it says you have I think it was like a 95% chance of hitting. So the only thing that changes that 95% chance, of course, is modifiers. And in space opera, there's a ton of modifiers. There's modifiers for movement, for the target moving, for you moving, the size of the target, if you're under combat fire, all these things, right? So that number is going to go up and down depending on on all these modifiers, which some people think that that's a lot of stuff to keep track of, and I guess it was during combat.
I have no idea what you just said. You lost me in the middle of that explanation.
All right, so let's go back. So I use a percentile system to hit, and you have to have a number to hit, and that number goes up and down depending on all these modifiers
Okay.
that you got to roll under.
Okay. But before you even get to the combat system, you have to create your character.
Right. So that's where we'll start off. So the first book is basically a character player's handbook, right? It tells you or shows you how to make a character. And the first thing you do when you make a character is
You choose your character classes.
that's right. You choose your character class, and there's 6 classes.
There's armsman, astronaut, tech, with a subclass of arms tech or crimes tech, and scientist, which you can be a pure researcher, a medical researcher, a physician, and engineering subclasses. Those are the classes.
right. And then you determine your attributes, and there's 14 attributes,
14 personal characteristics. A D100 is rolled.
right? And you use you roll a percentile dice, which you then go on a chart, and it tells you what number that corresponds to between 1 and 19.
Yes.
19 is the highest. Now people think, well, why do I have to roll percentile dice and then convert it to a number between 1, and why not just roll a d20? So what they also did is they, depending on your class, they gave you points to adjust to whatever you rolled on a percentile dice.
There's 14 personal characteristics that you have to roll.
Yes.
Okay.
So Jolene's, even though she's played, she's never made a character. So
No, because Saul and made the characters for me, or Felipe, I don't know
I
who.
did him. Oh, I think he was using my characters. I'll quickly rattle off the attributes. There's physique, strength, constitution, agility, dexterity, empathy, intelligence, psionics, intuition, bravery, leadership, general technical aptitude, mechanical aptitude, and electronic aptitude.
Electronics aptitude.
Electronics aptitude. So what happens is you roll you roll percentile dice, and you roll let's say you roll 35, and that corresponds to like a 12 on your.
This is like way old school
Yes, way
character
old school.
creation.
But if you're an armsman, let's say you're talking about physique. If you're an armsman, you get 40 points to spend on the percentile side of the
And that's
equation.
where the hard part comes in on making these characters. I read that you have all those points to spend, and
Right.
you got to figure out where you're going to put them. So
Right.
that's probably why it takes people so long to make
Well,
their characters.
that's true because they gotta make decisions. So what's really cool, I thought it was really cool back in the day when I was making characters, is let's say you only need 3 points to get to the next, from let's say 12 to 13. So out of the 40 points, you spend 3 points to raise your strength to the next level. And so
Well,
you could like micromanage how many points you're going to spend here and there, and
mini maxers.
maximize the numbers.
But
that you
before
need.
you get to that,
Yes,
you have to, after you choose your characteristic, you get your 14 things.
yes.
Then you have to choose, you have to do your planet of birth.
Well,
Because that, or do you do that before you choose
you
your,
do that before, yeah.
because that's going to change, that could change a lot of stuff.
Yes.
Because you have to roll for gravity, atmosphere, and climate.
You're
And
getting ahead of myself.
I'm so confused.
So you rank a character, you make your attributes. Once you decide, and then you decide what class you're going to be, and then you get these bonus points to boost whatever numbers you want.
But you're not going to want to do that until you know where you come from and stuff,
no,
right?
well, the way they have it set up, no. So what another thing is that the attributes or characteristic boost only apply to certain attributes. For example, the armsman, basically a fighter type character, will only. I think I wrote it down even.
So you can see why people think that this is a hard game, because it's really hard just to create a character.
It's not that hard. It's just a little bit more complicated than rolling 3 6-sided dice, and there you
So
go.
you don't have to tell us everything about
So
it.
so let me say. So for example, the armsman has the 40 points to spend on physique, strength, constitution, agility, bravery, and leadership. So those are the 6 things that he can adjust, and those are the more important things for that thing. So if you're the scientist, you can adjust things that are important to the scientist and stuff like that. So then you go to the planet stuff, and it's random. I always did it random, just like they say. And what are they? there's gravity,
Gravity, atmosphere, and
atmosphere,
climate.
and climate. So each one is like a D20.
And it says this could have effects on your personal characteristics
Right.
and some of the choices of your race.
That's true. That is true. After you figure out what planet you come from and type of planet, you go to you
What
choose
kind
your
of race?
And the races are there's quite a few. There's human, obviously, transhuman, Pithecine, Saurian, Ursoid, feline, canine, and avian. So some of them might not make sense as to what exactly they are. Some of them obviously.
You forgot Ursoid. Did you forget Ursoid?
I think I got Ursoid.
Okay.
So Ursoid, just since you mentioned it, is a bear-like race. So this is very. I think it comes from I forget what set of books, but there's a set of books out there, and this was a lot of '70s stuff, where when you go into space, you encounter cat people, dog people, and this
Ooh,
one.
I think maybe it comes from Planet of the Apes. No.
Well, it might be. I don't know when Planet of the
Well,
Apes
well,
came out.
well, they have the
Pithecine.
Pithecine, which is resembles gorillas and stuff like that. I like
Right.
the Saurian, which are warm-blooded dinosaur race myself. I don't know how big they are, but I know that the cat people and dog people are pretty cool, and bear. So it's an interesting idea. I think a lot of it might come from Star Wars came out, and they have the scene with all the different characters
Right. Right.
because
And
it's space. So
right, and it's opera, right?
yeah.
Big thing. And Scott Bazar actually does say that in his introduction. He says that space opera is trying to emulate the worlds or
The feeling.
the feeling of Doc Smith's books.
And he specifically talks about about
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Yes. So when I talk about the Doc Smith, the Lensman series, and he also mentions George Lucas's Star Wars, in the introduction. So obviously that was on the brain of at least Scott Bazar and probably the creators of the game. Star Wars came out in 1977, so it makes sense that they would include stuff like that. So there's quite a few races, and the only thing that limits what race you are is the planet. Like there's only certain planet types, certain races.
There's all kinds. There's like 20 types of planets.
Yes.
So this is why if you ever want to play space opera, hope that your GM takes pity on you and makes all kinds of characters you can choose from, so you don't have to do it yourself.
Well, we're almost done. So you choose your race, and in race, there's all kinds of information about the race, and then after that, you choose what military branch or civilian branch you want to go into, and there's all kinds of tables of rank and how much money you make and getting promotions.
A la Traveler.
Very Traveler-like, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. That's exactly what I've always thought. It was very Traveler-like in that sense. And there's a lot of influence of Traveler.
In fact, one of the reviewers of Space Opera, and I don't know where the article was published or anything, but I read this one guy said that if Space Opera's rules were combined with the smoothness of Traveler, that it would be the perfect science fiction game.
Okay, I wouldn't necessarily call Traveler smooth, but the simpler way of doing things in Traveler, yes. And I think that's what they were going for. They saw Traveler, which obviously came out in 70. I forget what year.
The 70s.
Yeah, right before this came out. And they looked and they go, well, it's not complicated enough. It's too simple.
Traveler?
Yes.
Oh, so from a miniature gamer's perspective, they looked at it and said this.
Well, I don't know from what perspective, but I think they wanted.
I think their character creation for Space Opera is a little better than Traveler, because in Traveler
you could die. Yes.
So
there's no dying in Space Opera. So I think you spend 2 or 3 hours making a character. Your character should stay alive. Right. So you pick your race, you pick your service, they call it, and it has all kinds of tables and stuff like that about. You roll to see how long you're going to be in the service. The tours of duty are 2 years, and after that you can roll to get re-enlisted, and there's all kinds of numbers you can number crunch to figure that out. You roll 3 6-sided dice, and you have to roll a number of that or higher to get re-enlisted. But the table goes from like 2 years, which is the minimum, all the way to 20 plus years. So you could be in the military for a long time or in the service for a long time. And then they have tables about information about severance pay
Oh my
and stuff
god.
and retirement and all this other stuff. It's very a la Traveler,
Traveler.
right? Then you get to pick your skills, which is very unlike Traveler, right? Traveler, you just roll dice and see what,
Yes, Traveler's really hard with the skills.
right? Because you don't
Because
necessarily
you
get,
never know what you're gonna get,
yeah.
and
Sometimes it
sometimes
sucks.
your character sucks.
And he's the one that lives, right? The one that
Yes,
sucks.
that's what happens.
So there's none of that. In fact, they give you total.
It says the last step can be the most time consuming step.
You got
You get a
points,
generous number of skill points,
yes,
and then you have to figure out where to put them.
right. So I will say that this is probably the area that could probably use the most streamlining. Right. It was made in 1980, so things just don't seem very pertinent these days. And but anyway, you get between 7 and 133 skill points. Right? And then on top of that, you get 5 skill points for every year that you were in the service.
Oh my god.
So you can, like you said, you get a generous amount of skill points. Most people will average at least over 100 skill points, and then they add the bonus points of how many years you were in the service. So if you were in the service for 20 years, right, that's 100 skill points right there. And so you're talking about you could be dealing with like 200 skill points, and that's a lot. But the problem is there's like over 200 skills. Now some of these skills can easily have been like just reduced in the number.
Well, it's kind of like, which is the system? I don't think it's Savage Worlds. Is it Savage? No, it's GURPS.
GURPS, yes.
Where at this point you want your GM to narrow what your skill. You want to know, like, maybe I don't need the 150 to 230 skill set, right? I need only these 20 that I should choose from,
Well,
or something like that,
a
right?
lot of it is that there's a lot of prerequisites, right? So, for example, I
Please don't go into an example.
okay, but there's a lot of prerequisites. It means that you have to get this before you can get that, and then you have to get that before you can get this. So, like, let's say, for example, faster than light pilot.
You
have
can't see me, but I'm dying.
you have to be an orbital pilot before you can be a faster than light pilot. You have to be a interstellar pilot before you can be an FTL planet. So there's all these steps to get to become a faster than light pilot, and you have to have a lot of skill in it. So there's all these steps. So you're gonna be pouring points into stuff like that, where instead of saying, "Well, I'm just gonna pay 50 points to become a faster than light pilot." Anyway, like I said, it's an old game. A lot of points being thrown around, a lot of decisions being made, and I think that is what probably takes the longest. But when you get done with your character, you have a character that is one that you totally created and got not maybe all the things that you wanted skill wise, because you could always use more, but you definitely got a character that you would like to play. Unlike Traveler, when sometimes you look at your Traveler character and he has, points in I don't know what. But I remember my last character; he was almost useless in a certain sense because he had a bunch of points in like I forget what it was. But I'm like, eh. But that's the what is it? That's the charm of Traveler, is that you have to play characters that you think are broken or pretty crappy.
They are, for the most part, unless you're really good at your roles.
But space opera goes to a different tack, right? At the very beginning of the introduction, Scott says that you're not making average Joes. You're making larger than life,
It's more like a D&D. You're extraordinary character.
extraordinary characters. Exactly. People who are normal stay home, get a job, get married, have children, and live their life that way. You and the characters that you make are not like that. They're heroic. They're superhero, not superheroic, but they're heroic. They're adventurous. They're saving the galaxy.
I think the only thing you haven't talked about yet is psionics.
Right, and that's the last part of the book because it says that you don't have to include it in your game if you don't want to. And Scott Bazaar does mention this, is that there's a lot of stuff in space opera. There's a lot of stuff in space opera that can be just ignored. Like they talk about stamina factor and wind factor, and that's kind of like getting exhausted and points before you can, you get winded. That means you lose a certain amount of points and or your ability to do certain things. Your stamina factor is like your hit points, and so I never dealt with wind because I thought it was too much, too complicated. You would lose points in wind for running a certain distance. I didn't want to keep track of all that stuff, so I usually ignored it. And most of the time they were in space stations and stuff like that, so they were not going to run, hundreds of miles or kilometers. So psionics is basically the Force. If you've read uh, the Lensman series from Doc Smith, they had these mental abilities that were kind of like spells, and this is the classic the Force use. They able to do anything you've seen in Star Wars. They had spells for it, and or they had psionics things, talents they call them in space opera, and you would develop them. You would spend points to develop your spells. I mean your spells, your psionics. It was very difficult to be able to use psionics, but you had to have a really high psionic score before you would even get a ability to use psionics. I think it was like 16 would be the bare minimum. Might have been higher. That's volume 1, making the character.
Oh my god.
So we go to volume 2. I'm just going to go run ramshot over that one. It's basically the Game Master book. It starts off with equipment, all kinds of stuff. A lot of stuff that is now obsolete, right? They talk about computers weighing tons, right? Now we have computers that fit in our pockets. So obviously, a lot of the stuff is very dated, but for the most part, some of the stuff is just
Space stuff.
well, yeah, exactly. It's just normal stuff that you could include in a space game. They talk about survival tents, flashlights. I mean, all kinds of stuff, and then they get into weapons, and then they get into combat. And the combat, actually, people say it's very complicated, but it's only from page 39 to page 51. So that's only like 12 pages, and in those 12 pages, there's 4 pages of complete charts of every weapon that they have mentioned. Right? Now, you think that's a lot. I'm going to be looking through all kinds of charts. No, because you're usually going to use certain weapons. So what I did, I would just I have a little box of the weapon that you're using, and I would put in the numbers that I needed for that weapon. Bada bing, bada boom, easy. You wouldn't have to keep looking at the chart in this book. So out of what's that? 12 pages, 4 pages are charts. So that's only 8 pages of combat rules. Now, it is true, like I said before at the beginning or earlier, is that combat can be complicated because of all the modifiers that you have to figure out to see what you need to roll. And the reason for that is because like they said, you are exceptional characters, so you start with a very high number to hit. 95% chance if you're standing up. That's a huge on percentile dice. Your chances are pretty good. But what really mitigate that is all the stuff you're doing when you're trying to shoot somebody in an adventure type game, running, shooting out of a car, all these things. So that's the stuff that drives people nuts. And for me, I don't remember it being that big of a deal. I would throw out some numbers, and they have a chart that
You guys loved the charts. That's
they have the
problem.
chart, but after a while, it's like you can memorize all these numbers, and some of them I can still remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
Then the very last part is starships, how to make them, what how to make them, how they work, what's inside of them, and at the very end is Starship Combat. Now, I will admit that Starship Combat in space opera is very complicated, right? Very complicated. It is basically like a miniature Starship game where you moving. They suggest using graph paper and
Oh, this is popped up. Starship Combat Pathfinder. Pathfinder? No.
Starfinder.
Starfinder.
Yes.
Put Starship Combat in because it's about starships, right?
Yes, you're gonna fight.
And I sat through a game.
You fell asleep to it. Actually.
I didn't make it through the whole combat because Felipe and the GM were discussing the the grid paper or whatever they were doing it on, and I couldn't handle it. I fell
It's
asleep.
actually very reminiscent of space opera. The same grid. You're moving at a certain, but I think space opera kicks it up a notch in a little bit of complication. For example, depending on the size of the ship, it could only change its course 10% of, or
Oh my god.
a percentage of its size. So it could get really complicated. And for the most part, I pretty much ignored spaceship combat because
If
it's
you
just,
if you do it like Star Wars, then you can just kind of ignore it and just say the ship goes this way and you're coming that way and stuff, right?
I mean, like the movie Star Wars.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but a lot of people like the idea of fighting ship to ship. Most of my players never really cared about that
Well,
because
because if you get hit, you're
yeah,
gonna
it'll
die.
blow up. Yeah, that's not a good ending. But for the most part, like I said, I ignored spaceship combat, especially when I was running space opera because it was just, to me, it was too complicated. And basically, it's like a little mini game, kind of like in Starfinder.
Starfinders.
It's like a little miniature game. Boom, the game stops becoming a fantasy or
Sci-fi.
a role playing game and becomes a tabletop miniature game.
Just for that particular portion of it.
Yes, of course. And space opera does exactly the same thing.
It's
And
very interesting. So I think people that would like space opera are people that like a lot of who like to dig into rules and like to look at the complicatedness of it.
right, and then somebody pointed out, like, they on Facebook, they posted about learning a new skill, right? And indeed, it does make it sound like it's ridiculous. It is ridiculously. It depends on the level of the person who's teaching you, the level you're trying to achieve, and then there's some formula that you have to punch in to be able to see what your chances are of learning going to the next step,
Wow.
right? So, but for the most part, when you have a space opera character, you're pretty much the like top notch dogs of the universe, right? You are the heroes of the universe, and
You
most
don't
of the
need
time,
to learn a new skill.
you don't usually need to learn stuff. Now, you may or may not uh, allow people to stay in the service very long, so they may want, like, limit all your terms of tour of duty is only like 5 to 6 years or 10 years. That means they don't get as many skill points and stuff. But I didn't play it that way. I just made characters who stayed a good amount of time. And in space opera, people live a long time. All the creatures live a long time. At least most of the average length of lifespan is 125 years. So if you get out of the service at 40,
40.
you still got a lot of time to goof around and do all kinds of stuff. So for me, I was always just like a lot of people probably did. Is it's a game that is very complicated and it can be super complicated if you use every rule, but you could also not use rules as you see fit. In fact, it talks about if you just want to run a human campaign and ignore all the
Other races?
other races, you can. If you want to ignore psionics, you can. You can ignore wind factor, which is the exhaustion rules. You can. I mean, and sometimes, like I said, sometimes the certain things, like, you could just totally just ignore. There's this thing called the handoff CR, which is called a characteristic role, and there is literally a page and a half of rules of handing off and passing things. Literally passing, like throwing the ball, or handing off, like a handoff for handing off the football. And there's all kinds of, there's the speed of the person, there's all kind, are they running at the same speed, are they running in different directions? And I was like, what, why is there so many rules for such a simple thing? It could have been, there's all kinds of things like that you run into this in space opera, where things can be really, what is it, not simplified, but condensed and made easier. Well, that's simplified. And of course, the typos. It's filled with typos. I don't know how many passes they did with an editor, but they could have used at least a couple more. Just, simple typos like dropped off letters, or add letters that don't need to be there.
You didn't have a spell checker back then, or
Well, yeah, I didn't have a.
there was the word
There was
processing
no
was
processing.
yeah.
I think it was old style typewriter,
Yeah.
I have somebody read it and fix it, and then have to retype it. And definitely publishing is much easier these days with the advent of computers and publishing software.
So you like the game,
Yes,
but you've just described a very complicated game to me.
correct. And I think I like I said I stopped running it over probably about 15 years ago, but I still like it. I haven't played. I've tried other science fiction games, and other science fiction games are for me. I play other science fiction games because I think they have an interesting mechanic. They have an interesting background. For example, Coriolis, which is based on Free League's uh, dice system, is a one that I like. There's one that I tried to get into, which was Modifius's Infinity, but that's kind of complicated too. And I don't think Star Wars. I did buy the anniversary edition. Like I said, I've never played it. I never got into it, but I bought it, and I still haven't taken the shrink wrap off and read the rules. I did try Star Wars Edge of the Empire. Edge of the Empire. I really like that system. I think it's really neat. I just played it a few times. I ran it a few times, and I played it at a friend's house, but I couldn't make the commute all the way to where he lived. It was he just lives too far for me and my car. And but I only played I think once or twice, and then I decided I couldn't make the commute to the coast. I still like space opera. I'm thinking about maybe running it for my Friday night group.
Oh, they would love it.
And well, I don't know about that. And
They would love it because it's complicated and there's lots of rules and they could argue about them.
I don't know. Well, see, what's funny is that the person that I was talking about, a guy Happy Jacks, who said that all he got to do was make a character. He likes GURPS, right? And GURPS could be a very complicated game.
A lot of people like making characters, no matter how long it takes.
Yeah, but he said he thought it was way too complicated and a not very good system.
I think it is like any other system. Once you know the rules to make the character, it may be a long process, but at least you know what you're doing. The first time you do it and you don't know, if somebody doesn't know what to tell you to do, if you're trying to read it, like me and Augustine trying to read the Traveler book to make characters, it's very, very difficult.
Well, rereading the book now, I was just rereading the first volume of character creation. When I was really confused when I first read it, me and my brother when we were younger, it's not that confusing. Well, one, I already know the system, but two, I was relearning it, so maybe that's why it was so easy. But I'm like, wow, I can't believe that. I thought this was really difficult. It actually is just a step by step process that takes a while. And like I said, like you said, the buying of the skills is probably the most time consuming. But that's because you have maximum amount of freedom to decide what kind of character and what kind of skills your character is going to have. And that means to me, I think you get a character that you really want, not character that you have to play. So go out there and buy Space Opera, and no, go out there and check it out. You can buy the PDF on Drive Through RPG. You can go to their website. Just put Fantasy Games Unlimited. I don't know.
Or better yet, find someone who's already run the game and see if they'll run it for you. Maybe they'll make characters for you or help you with making the characters.
I personally like making characters in any RPG that I make because that gives me an idea of how the game is going to be played.
That's what one of our friends, Jason, always says. You have to make the character to learn the system.
That's a good idea. I thought I'd come in with that one. I really like it. It's just somebody. This is the reason I made this. I made this episode is because one, I really love the game. I ran it for such a long time, and lately I've been seeing it come up again and again on the Dead Game Society group on Facebook, and it keeps reoccurring, and people keep going, it's not a dead game. It's still being published. And in fact, it just came out with 3 new books, right?
Well, the last one was 2018.
That's pretty recent.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about the supplements. There's a ton of supplements for this game. There's a lot of scenario books. There's these star atlases that have planets, that have descriptions of planets, and all kinds of there's a lot of what do you call it, plot hooks to get your characters in trouble, and it's really cool. There's a number of star atlases. There's a huge meta of the game as far as the future history of the background of the setting. I only mentioned it because it's very dated, because this game was written in 1980. So basically, it became 1980 type star races in space, or empires, right? There's the GPR, the Galactic People's Republic, which is kind of like the USSR. There's the Terran Federation, which is mainly the Western Europe and the United States. And then, of course, they encounter alien races with their own empires and stuff like that. So there's all this in the first book, the Terran Atlas #1. There's all this future history in that book, and then there's other books that have quite a bit of history at the beginning of the book, and I think they're pretty neat. They have a lot of information. Then there's the star spacecraft atlases, and this gives you books. These are books that have all kinds of different spacecraft, and those are pretty neat. And those, I think people have talked about it. Those are very useful for even like Star Wars, and especially Traveler, because this is more or less a more realistic game than, let's say, Star Wars. So there's a lot of stuff, and obviously they're still coming out with them. They came out with there is the GPR, Atlas #4, Atlas #7, the Blarad Kingdoms, Star Kingdoms, and Atlas #6, the Hiss, and the Hiss are the Saurians. I have to mention Cipriano, my friend. He played a Saurian, and one of the things he had a problem with is that his empathy level was really low. So he was like a psycho killer. He had no empathy, and so he played it to the hilt, which I always thought was hilarious, and I think that's pretty interesting. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Sip for playing that character all the time, and he had a lot of fun.
As you can tell, Saul is very excited about this game. So there you go.
There you go. Okay.
He's going to have to cut this one down a bit, I think. So if you are interested in space opera, find it, play it, have fun. This is Game of Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
I'm not done yet. Goodbye. Have a good day.